I just like love to be the voice of normalization. Like if you're feeling overwhelmed and feeling like what the hell is going on, you're not alone. And there are little things you can do to feel better. That's my whole sort of mission in life, is to let people know nothing's gone wrong. Yeah.
You teach people how to take care of themselves.
Just take care of you, people. That's
Take
all.
care. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the channel, or welcome to the channel if you're new here. I have the amazing, the delightful Dr. Michelle Chestovich, who is a family doc, a life coach for female physicians. You call yourself the mama doc, right? Mama doc life coach, the podcast host of Remind Yourself. And what are we reminding ourselves of, Michelle?
Number one, you remind yourself that you're awesome and amazing just today as you are, and you retrain the brain a little bit away from, we don't forget all the amazing things we learned in medical school, and yet there are things that we can retrain our brain that are a little bit better for us.
I love your podcast.
So it's a double entendre, I believe they call that.
Yeah, that's a big word for me.
Yeah, I don't know. Could be wrong. It could be wrong. Moving on. It's probably wrong.
It reminds me of Think Again, like Adam Grant's Think Again, where the things we thought we knew or things we used to serve us before no longer serve us now, or they were constructed off of false beliefs to begin with.
Yes, that's exactly it.
So for people who have not yet met you or would like to get to know a little bit more about you, can you please tell us more about yourself?
Well, I've got a zest for life, I would have to say. And I love all kinds of different things. And yet there have been times in my life where I've really felt like I was drowning and hardly keeping my head above water. So while my brain veers towards optimism and joy, there have definitely been times where I'm like, all I see is darkness and gloom. You mentioned that I'm a family doc, which is amazing. I've loved doing that for 20 years, taking care of so many different people. And I also have 4 children. So in the early years of my practice, when I had four kids under 6, hello, what was I thinking? Right? I just decided let's get it done. But anyway, it was just a really busy time in my life, and also a lonely, in a weird way, time, and just an overwhelming time. And so I just like love to be the voice of normalization. Like if you're feeling overwhelmed and feeling like what the hell is going on, you're not alone. And there are little things you can do to feel better. That's my whole sort of mission in life, is to let people know nothing's gone wrong.
And that image, just painting the picture, I mean, you're taking care of all the patients, taking care of 4 children. On your website, you've got, you were previously the Queen of Overwhelm. What has helped you to shift things where you're at now?
Yeah, I think, coaching has changed my life completely. I feel like I have the keys to the universe, and it doesn't include working harder and faster, which is how I always solve problems. And most of the women that I work with are high achieving, and the people who are probably watching you, right? Very high achieving, and we can accomplish anything we really set our minds to. And yet, but like, what is the effect of that on our body and our mind and our soul, right?
Yes. And what was coming to mind when you were telling of all the things that you're doing was Dr. Gabor Mate's. He was just listening to a conversation, and he was talking about why women are at, higher risk for autoimmune diseases compared to men, because we take it all on, right? Like we are the ones responsible. We are, our society creates the construct that we have to take it all on, that we're the nurturing ones, which is like definitely a social construct. And how, when we have been doing these things for so long, I kind of think about it like a fish in a water bowl, and you ask them, how's the water? And they're like, what water? You
That's
just
right.
never step back to explore, like, where did I learn this behavior? And why do I not feel like I'm worthy to put myself first? And the consequences of not being able to prioritize ourselves first.
100%. And to pull back one of my favorite words from medical school, it's just a variation on how you described it about the fish in the water. It's like it's the milieu that we're all in, right?
Mhm,
And when we're in it and we see our colleagues acting the same way, I've got to do more. And,
mhm,
hate to use the term, but no, I don't hate to use the term. Like the gaslighting that goes on that you have to behave a certain way or you're not pulling your weight or you're not a team player. I have
mhm.
so many women saying, like, I just, don't want to do this, but I'm told that I'm not a team player. I'm like, yeah, because that keeps you in line and keeps you serving not your highest good, right? Probably the bottom line of your organization, right? And yet,
Mhm.
to what aim, right? I work with so many women who are burnt out, and I ask them, I was at a conference last year with family medicine docs, the national conference, and I had a little booth, and all these people were going by, and I love just asking them, "How are things going for you?" Well, it's kind of a lot, and I would say, do you imagine that you'll be doing this, in another few years? Or is this job sustainable? I can't remember exactly how I worded it. And so many of them got tears in their eyes and they're like, no, I can't even imagine. And these are like 2 year out grads from residency. I just can't imagine going on like this. And it just breaks my heart, number one, that they're suffering so tremendously. And number two, like it makes me fear for our society. Like what's going to happen when the house of cards of medicine crumbles. But at the same point, part of me is just like, let's pull the card, let's have it crumble and
Yeah,
start over,
let's
right?
watch it
I'm sort of a
burn.
disruptor. That's the other thing I didn't mention. I started out saying that I have like a lot of zest for life, and I'm also a little feisty. you
Yeah,
know
you know what though? I just had this conversation too because I'm really feisty. And at the core of our feist is a catalytic event, is like we know the consequences. We can no longer unsee what we've seen. Can no longer be, I mean, the impacts of everything that you've experienced and gone through. It's like you have to shake up the world, and your why is so whole body why, like this
huh,
anger at the system, right? Like we can be pissed off at the system and the consequences of working in healthcare, which is a hypocritical term, right? It's not healthcare. And I remember even growing up, I felt like I was socialized to always, I was like carrying people's bags to show that I was being supportive and helpful. And when I was really ill, my dad called me really selfish with, ill with my eating disorder, and he called me selfish. And that word was like, I've spent my whole life making sure that everything that I did was to be the opposite of selfish. And
yeah,
he
it's like a
went,
four-letter word. I mean, it's very much disparaging, right? And it really goes to that center of the wound, the heart for many of us, right? To be called selfish or God forbid lazy.
lazy. That was the other word, selfish. Yeah. So interestingly, laziness was one thing that fueled my eating disorder habits, because I wanted to prove I wasn't lazy. And then I had a hard time resting because I was always trying to not be lazy or selfish. And my dad loved discipline. So I was disciplined, but high achievers to an extreme. And because our society often celebrates people who have restrictive type eating disorders that maybe haven't been pointed out, or like these, even in medicine, the weight biases, right? In medicine, we are having all these things. It's so objectifying, and it shapes how you're thinking in the day to day. And so I say that because it does tie back into medicine about how people feel working in a system that's objectifying and oppressing them. And especially as we're talking, one of the first things you're going to have happen at a family doc is I'm going to get weighed, and you're like, we're going to have conversations about the weight, and that's shifting over time. But these things that people may not have been thinking because it became so normalized.
100%. And to your point of like being high achieving and trying to like meet these ideals of other people, right? Because we're not taught as children, like, oh, who you are is amazing and whole and like follow your whatever. It's just like we're trying to like meet the approval of other people. And the same happens even when we become adults and we're in medicine. We've been trained that way. How can I make everybody like me? How can I show that I'm a hard worker, that I'm a team player? And we exhaust ourselves or hurt ourselves physically, like you were doing, right? With these behaviors. So even though we may get praise and it's interesting, right? I mean, we can talk about this. Like I talk a lot about external validation and people who receive all these awards in medicine. And number one, though, they still don't feel good inside. They don't
Mhm.
believe that they've earned it. They think that maybe it's false, or they think they need to do more to continually get the external validation. And two, it keeps you locked into always doing more and more and more and more and more.
Mhm.
And it's exhausting.
Yeah, so there's gonna be a lot of people that relate. Now tell us, if they're like, "Oh my god, that's me," what's the next step?
I think that you should reach out to Jillian
No,
and
to you, to you. This
I'm
is
in
about
one of us.
you, Michelle.
Here's what I'll tell you is that number one, you're not alone. You're not broken. This is just the messaging that your brain is saying. And I don't want to say that your brain is wrong, but before I understood the brain, before I got into coaching, got a coach for the first time, which was finally like the life jacket that made me feel like I wasn't drowning all the time.
Mm,
Um, it made me just realize like, oh, my thoughts aren't necessarily a truth. Like you think the same things again and again and again, and it becomes a belief. And
mm,
so it feels really, really true. But to have someone on the outside say, oh, well, that's just something that you're thinking again and again and again. It means just it's fascinating. It literally blew my mind. So I think you had asked me before, like how I started feeling better, and I just generically mentioned coaching.
yeah.
But to just bring it back just slightly, like I tried so many things. I've been someone who maybe it's a gift, maybe it's a curse, that I need a lot of sleep. And so like I would think like, so I don't skimp on sleep. And so I'd always think like, well, maybe I just need more sleep. Maybe I need more exercise. Again, I'm very blessed in the sense that like I love moving my body and sweating and things like that. It's always been fun for me. Well, not always fun, but a lot of the times it's really fun. So like these were things that I was doing that I know are like good for my body and my mind. Anyway, even when I was feeling really overwhelmed. And yet, like it would hardly help. Right. And then I'm like, well, maybe more date nights. Maybe if I see a therapist, maybe if I go to a conference on burnout. But none of these things, like, again, they'd get me above water, but then I'd start to sink back down. But then when I got a coach, even after like a week, I was like, oh my God, I have a life jacket on. Like, I understand now the world that I'm living in better than I'd ever understood before because someone explained my brain differently than I learned in medical school. I was a total dork and nerd in medical school. Like, I
Mm.
got it all right on those neural pathways. Anyway, I digress.
There's people who they've heard about coaching, but they're not quite sure how it works. Can you explain
Yeah.
about what your experience was like?
Yeah, it literally blew my mind. It changed everything. Just hearing the words that the way you think isn't necessarily true and that we have 70 to 80,000 thoughts a day. I always joke that I think a med student must have had to do that job, count the thoughts.
Yeah. Mm, And if you're counting your thoughts, you're like thinking more about counting the thought. How do they even count the thoughts?
Just understanding that I was more in control than I thought. I just thought some days I was lucky and I had a cloud of motivation over my head. But a lot of times I just was under this cloud of overwhelm, like I was in a bad storm system.
Mm,
I was like, shit, I gotta like move or something. Then I realized, oh, I can just explore why am I so overwhelmed? What are all these 10 thoughts that are making me feel overwhelmed all the time? And how can I shift things? Anyway, it just gave me back this locus of control that I was looking at. I was trying to manipulate everything around me to feel good externally. Ladies and gentlemen, I will just tell you that that doesn't work a lot of the time, particularly when you've got toddlers under your roof
mm,
or patients who, don't necessarily do what they want, or colleagues or parents or whoever who are saying things to us. We can't control that.
yeah. Yeah. It's interesting in coaching about always, you can't put somebody else in the result line, right? Like you can't make
That's right.
someone else do or think something differently about you. You can only control you.
Right. But we're kind of taught growing up that, like, what other people say, people have to act a certain way in order for us to feel good. Like, we always say, like, oh, Johnny, you hurt her feelings because you just like, wait a minute. And I get it that we need to teach people to, like, be kind and not be a-holes and say, mean things. At the same point, we're in charge of our emotions. That is
Mhm.
another thing. Like, no one teaches you that. Well, I think they're getting better in schools.
Are they?
I don't know.
I don't know. And so many times, I was telling you earlier, I love coaching so much that I go to, a lot of the coaching events and similar themes come up. And I know you have a coaching program. Can you share about your coaching program?
Yeah, I have a group program called Stress RX for physician women. So I thought that was kind of fun and clever, right? It's the
Mm-hmm.
solution to stress in a different way. And I talk a lot about mindset work because I think this cognitive work is so powerful. And yet, I also understand that we have a lot of cortisol in our body and we have a lot of triggers in our life, and our amygdala loves to fire when we've been traumatized. And there's a lot of big T and little t trauma in our lives, and just in medicine, right? In our training,
Mm-hmm.
my goodness gracious. And so I teach ways to recognize when that's going on, because again, most of us are walking around just like our cerebral, like we're thinking all the time, which is great. We
Yeah.
don't listen to our body.
Mm-hmm.
Women go all day long, they don't even go to the bathroom, they don't even feel that their bladder's full, so they're certainly not going to feel other emotions. They might notice like a tightness or like a sick feeling in their stomach when they get an email from like a boss, or a colleague says, hey, can you take call tonight, and you just kind of feel sick to your stomach. But we're so good at resisting emotion. So in my program, we open up the box of emotions, people. We learn how to name them, allow them, and realize like life is rich and amazing because we have a spectrum of emotions, right? But anyway, and I also just teach tangible tools in order to feel more in control. So many women come saying, I just feel overwhelmed, I'm stressed, I hate my job, I can't keep doing this. I'm working 2 hours every night and 5 hours every weekend, getting caught up on notes. So I love helping people learn very simple tools that, boom, get them back 5 to 20 hours of their week.
Oh my
Learn how to
gosh.
set boundaries without feeling like a narcissistic a-hole, right? These are the things I love to do. And to ask these beautiful questions of, what do I want? Because we probably haven't asked ourselves that since we've been in like kindergarten.
And honored it, right? It's like,
And honored it. That's right.
what do I want? And then people get in their head and justify why maybe they shouldn't want that or
Yeah,
feel
because
guilty.
you've been told that you're selfish. So of course we shut down
Mm-hmm.
what our true desires are. And here's what I'll tell you, as an adult in life, like there are things you're going to do that you don't want to do, and that's okay. But when it's a huge percentage because you're just trying to quote unquote make everybody else happy around you, like forget that. Like this is your precious life. What do you want to do? And if you're not loving it, what can you do differently? You're the CEO of your life. I love thinking about that.
That's powerful. Can you repeat it?
Yeah, you are the CEO of your life. And if you don't love how things are going, doesn't mean you're a horrible person. It means, oh, there are some things. How can I look at this? Decide, what do I want more of in my life? What do I want a little less of? How can I change things? That if I'm really struggling, it's okay to reach out and ask for help. I guess if I had a number one thing to say on this conversation today, people, nobody's doing okay. We
No.
all need help, and it's okay to get help. I know that we have this stigma in medicine that like we should be able to fix it. Of course, we're the fixers. We should be able to fix it. You can't fix your own damn brain, people. Or if you're having a heart attack, don't stent yourself, okay? You call 911 and you go to the hospital for that. So too, our brain can get sick, really, really sick. And sometimes it's just in that gray area of just, I call it the struggle bus. Like things aren't awesome, but it's not horrific. But there's this huge gray area where we can feel so much better if we get help, right? So
Mm-hmm.
that's my whole mission is, you guys, it's okay to not be okay. Please phone a friend,
It's
get a
important.
therapist, get a coach,
Yeah.
something.
It's important that you shared that everyone's struggling because when I was in oral surgery, the number one thing that exacerbated my own mental health decline was that I thought it was just me. And
Yes.
then I got diagnosed with high functioning depression, which interestingly, when you were talking about feeling your emotions, so in this past week, I've had two people that have known me. One of them just met me, is a new mentor of mine. And I started tearing up when I was talking about a challenging topic. And he was like, I know if you're tearing up, it has to be extremely painful because I usually think you're numb. And me as a very sensitive person, I didn't perceive that I was coming across stoic or numb. And I just talked to this morning, I wrote an article on a terminology that I don't agree with called terminal anorexia. And we don't have to talk about it this conversation. It's a very controversial term. There will be a podcast coming out, the articles on Kevin MD, but I talked about it to my former psychiatrist from when I was in oral surgery. And so she knows the most things that I talk about with like the most catalytic event of why everything I talk about came to fruition. And she said, yeah, you're an internalizer. Like no one would ever have perceived that you were struggling. And I'm like, that's not how it felt inside. But if I didn't look like I was struggling and I was verbalizing it, can you imagine all those other people, how we mask, we keep, we save face in order to protect, like we don't want our patients to know we're struggling, or our ego doesn't want our colleague to know we're struggling, which increases the guilt and shame. And then you go and isolate and increase your struggle.
Yes. And this can be very, very dangerous. And you know my story, but I will share it with the listeners here, the viewers. That's exactly what went on with my sister, Dr. Gretchen Butler, my baby sister. And unfortunately, she died unexpectedly by suicide 2.5 years ago. I guess it's almost been 3 years. It was March of 2021. And no one knew that she was struggling so tremendously. She was winning all the awards. She was the teacher of the year, the resident of the year. She was a radiologist at a level 1 trauma center, and she always showed up to work, did an amazing job. She was an amazing mama of 3. And it still is, it's choking me up. Like, it's so shocking that this happened. And it's because of, I think, the stigma. And it wasn't just one thing that caused her to die. It's this horrible imperfect storm. And yet I just want to yell from the rooftops, you guys, we all have multiple risk factors. Physicians are at very high risk. Women physicians are at 2.5 times risk of dying by suicide than our peers that are not in medicine. So we are in an at-risk population. So like, what are we doing to protect ourselves? Number one, we just need to talk about it. And so people understand this is a problem. We lose 300 to 400 physicians a year to suicide. I had no freaking idea until my sister died. And again, like in retrospect, like, yeah, she was maybe a little more stressed, maybe had a little postpartum anxiety, but like, I'm sure obviously the internal struggle in her body, in her mind were extraordinary. And yet she couldn't like just say like, oh my gosh, I am suffering tremendously, right? Because again, you think I'm the only one.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I just want listeners to know, viewers to know, you're not the only one. Nobody's doing okay. People weren't doing okay before the pandemic, and after the pandemic, like, it's still just a junk show. And in fact, it kind of shone a light in medicine on all of we knew about the problems before, but they became greater. And certainly the shortages with nursing staff and other staff since the pandemic, it's been huge. So I know there are a lot of people who are struggling. I just like to normalize and say everybody's struggling. Everyone has a different struggle. If it's not at work, it's home, it's in a relationship, it's with a neighbor, it's with somebody, with your own self. We need to just recognize that, because it can be really dangerous. You can think like, oh, I'm just keeping my problems to myself. I don't want to be a burden to others. But you know what? People want to help you. I mean, I would have given my sister both my eyes, my kidneys, whatever she needed. I would totally be blind and on dialysis if I knew she needed that much help.
Yeah.
So
every time I see Heart, I think of her.
She's a strong spirit.
And we have to speak louder and louder, like on behalf of Gretchen, why it's so important to come from the megaphones. And I know in our group, we all yell it louder for Gretchen too, for you, for Gretchen. And
I won't stop speaking about it, because if this could happen to this amazing, tremendous woman who looked like she had it all together, and I don't want to take away from her the beautiful life that she had, and yet her brain was really sick and she was unable to verbalize that. And like, if that can happen to her, like, it can happen to anybody. It's devastating to lose amazing humans on earth. I mean, all humans. Like, I have kind of a love for all of the humans, but the fact that this woman who loved her kids more than anything, left them. In fact, the last time I spoke to her was 3 days before she died. She was post-call, exhausted. You were on my podcast like a year ago, and we talked about this, how sleep deprivation was like one of the leading causes of her death. And then you shared your story, how sleep deprivation made your brain bonkers as well. But she said to me, she was supposed to go on spring break the following week. She said, should I leave my little one with grandma? I feel so guilty leaving him for a week. She had an 18-month-old at the time, and then like a 5 and 7-year-old. And I said, oh, sweetie, The toddler does not want to go to the beach. Leave the toddler with grandma and go have an amazing time with your husband and kids. And she said, I just feel so guilty leaving him for a week. And then 3 days later, she left all of us forever. So, I mean, clearly her brain was not in the right state. A healthy brain doesn't take its own life. But the fact that she had so much love for them, like that doesn't save you, people.
No, there's a term called psychache.
Yeah.
It's something when I'm sleep deprived and I can tell it's where I get that psychache. It brings me back because in oral surgery, I could not, when people are burnout, they're in survival mode. When they're overtired, they're in survival mode, and it reduces your capacity to think clearly and also to expand your options. And with our ego telling us that quitting is like equivalent to failure, or if people get sued and then they think it's a failure, like all those things, the litigations in our medicine right now, and they just feel trapped in their mind and can't see a way out. When I was in oral surgery, I thought I had to finish the program or take my own life. Like my brain did not offer me any options in between. And I was fortunate that I was coping with an eating disorder because people physically were able to tell, like, she's not well, get eating disorder help. And when I got to the eating disorder therapist, he's like, what's another option? And I was like, first is like kind of freeing. I'm like, holy shit, there's like another option. But
Yes.
like when we
The
don't
lifeline.
giving ourselves permission to put ourselves first. And I had signed a 13-year contract with the military. So I was feeling guilty, as you mentioned, about I can't leave my program. I can't leave the military without an oral surgeon. And I had already lost all sense of what I wanted because I'd already given that up when I was in college. I wanted to be a psychologist, and my dad didn't want me to do that. So I pursued something wasn't my top passion, and completely had lost myself. And you were talking about the emotions, and like when we're so numb, we're like, I don't even know what I want. I don't even know how to tell anymore, which
Right.
I love that you have a group and a community because you start to hear what you're struggling coming out of other people's mouths,
Yes.
and it helps you to then re-identify, kind of rediscover who you are, what you want, being surrounded by people who help to empower you to take those next steps.
Yes. And to normalize that you're not the only one struggling because, you mentioned that got real dangerous for you, right?
Yes.
Then the shame comes like, I'm the only one who can hack it. Like, that's a freaking lie, but no one talks about it. For goodness sakes alive. Let's talk about it. I joke around. I spoke at a conference last year and it just happened to be in a beautiful tropical location on a beach. And I heard women in the afternoon on the beach talking about like their, uteruses, their uteri hanging out and who should they go see. I'm like, if we can be talking about this with one another, we sure, goodness sakes, should be able to talk about like, who's your therapist? Like, what dose of sertraline are you on? What, has coaching been helpful for you? What tools do you find the most helpful? Right? My goodness, our brains are a part of our body. We take care of our heart, we brush our teeth, we, maybe comb our hair, whatever. We do things to take care of ourselves,
Sometimes. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
We go and get our mammograms, take care of ourselves, colonoscopies. I'm just going to throw out some preventive care things as a primary care doc. Everybody, make sure you're up on your preventive health. But like, what about our brains, people?
And what do you think? I know that this is kind of a long stigma.
Yeah.
Like, what, why do you think it is such a stigma?
That's a really good question. I mean, it used to be that like suicide was a crime. I mean, I'm just thinking even about like that's the extreme, right? That's the extreme of a very sick brain, a mentally ill brain. And it's like kills itself, right? But there's just stigma. I don't know. I don't know why. Like if it's a fault of character that you have depression. I mean, again, I just think that people didn't understand the brain as well in the past, and like the stigma has followed along. Like, oh, you're kind of a lazy, blah blah blah, right? Like there are these like puritanical virtues put upon people. And so, like, I think even though we started to understand the brain back in the, I don't know when, and when we started using medications to treat anxiety and depression and things like that, I still think that that stigma has followed along. And it is my mission on earth to just tell everybody, like, okay, I talk about mental health and mental illness, but I also just talk about brain health.
Yeah.
And what are we doing? Again, I went into primary care not to make the big bucks, but because I believe in prevention.
Mm.
So again, I go to the dentist twice a year, I get my mammogram, all these things to keep me healthy. What do we do for our brain preventatively? Right?
Yeah.
I personally, I talk it out. I have
Yeah.
learned to allow my emotions. I have a
Mhm.
therapist, I have a coach, like all of these things. But I don't think that that's mainstream yet. But I'm just going to keep talking about it until it becomes mainstream, or at least I've done my bit on earth.
Yeah. And I think Simon Sinek, if that's how you pronounce his name, calls it mental fitness,
Yeah,
right?
right. I mean, we go and do reps in the gym so we, get some biceps. And again, I'm all about like functional, like I like to be strong, not to look a certain way. So this is my mindset shift over the years. It's just like I want to like do stuff. I love getting out and hiking and like trying to keep up with teenagers and 20-year-olds, I tell you, who are fit. I gotta work hard. Just because I enjoy getting out and enjoying this glorious earth, nature, right? But I love that mental fitness. What do we do for our mental fitness? So good.
Yeah. I had this revelation the other day. If you were to say, I love myself, how does that make you feel?
Me,
Hmm.
um, at this point in my life, I'd say that I feel proud and it feels true. I mean, all the time? No, but I've learned to love my rusty parts. And I talk about that with myself and with my clients a lot, how we get so focused on the negative, right? Our brains are wired for negativity. We brought our brains to medical school so we can do a full page differential on a cough, for instance. So, of course, we see the negative. It saves our patients' lives. But then we also see the negative in our surroundings, what needs to be tidied up, what drives us bonkers about our partner once we've been with them for a bit, and with ourselves. We see the negative. I just have learned to realize, like, oh, this is a part of me. Like, I have 10% of me that's like not the best. It's kind of rusty and warty and not my favorite. And I love her because she's a part of me. And I can also realize, like, look at all these amazing things. And that also helps me see that better in others. Because I can,
Mm-hmm.
and I do, I'm human. I narrow in on, like, this is the 10% of you that's driving me crazy. And I give all kinds of ideas on how people should, behave in my home. And
That's
I realized,
interesting.
yeah, anyway. So that's a long-winded answer to
It's
how would
good.
I.
I like the longer answers because it helps me understand your thought process and how that came to be. If you were to post online, I love myself, like to a group, what would be the thoughts?
Oh, see, this is interesting because then it starts to feel a little bit like, oh, she's a little
Mm-hmm.
self-righteous. She's a
Doesn't
little full of herself.
it? Mm-hmm.
Wow, what's she covering up?
Okay, so who wins when
Interesting.
is it like who wins when we think that? When we think loving ourselves out loud
Yeah.
is
Nobody, in fact, and it just perpetuates that myth that it's like selfish. Because I do believe the two keys to the universe are understanding that the way we think about something creates the way we feel. It's not just the thing. Triggers aside, amygdala
yeah.
firing aside, right? I always like put that caveat in there. But then the second key to the universe is self-compassion. Like, and if we
Mm.
don't give a darn about ourselves, it's going to have a hard time to have self-compassion. But self-compassion allows you to fall down and fail, right? Like I used to think like a 96 was a horrible grade. Like if I had a 98, that was acceptable. Like 96% for me was like, that's not good enough, right?
Yeah. Or the 99, what the hell happened to that one point?
I know, right? But like a 98 felt pretty good. But at
Yeah.
any rate, like so high achieving. But like now I just realize, like, oh, I can allow disappointment, I can allow failure, I can allow all of this and have my own back, which is what I've learned with self-compassion. So yeah, I feel like in the last 5 years for sure, I've turned up the dial on caring for myself. I think I've always been pretty decent to myself. Interestingly, as a runner, you would appreciate this. Maybe it was like, man, I'm bad at remembering the years, 10, 12 years ago, something like that in my past. I did a marathon and I went to the expo where you get your bag and your
Mm.
number.
Best
And
part. Best part.
Yeah, it's always exciting. Like it's gonna be the best race ever. And there were these speakers there. I believe it was another mother runner. Have you ever heard of them? At any rate, they're these two women who, support women runners. And I heard them talk for a few minutes. And there were two things that it said were amazing. Number one, chunk up the race, 10 mile, 10K. So that's was fun. So for you runners out there doing a marathon, that's a good way to think about it. And number two, if you wouldn't say it to a friend, don't say it to yourself.
Yeah.
And it's like I had heard, I mean, I was like in my 30s, late 30s probably when I heard this. It's not like that I hadn't heard it earlier, but I think that my gentle prodding, and maybe it wasn't even gentle, like, come on, Michelle, you can do better, you can do better in school, in athletics, maybe helped me, but it also kind of made me feel like I was never quite good enough.
Yeah, it's totally resonates. I was thinking about doing a video on, I have compulsive running, and it took me a lot I just did a running challenge over the past year, and I was compassionately running, and how different that felt, because in my head, I had a nice, nurturing person. But years ago, I had that self-critic that was propelling, and I quit prematurely. I didn't do as well in races because the self-critic would get in the way of just allowing yourself to show up for practice. And in marathoning, you have to relax in order to actually go faster and farther without getting fatigued. And if we're self-compassionate, we relax. If we're
Yes,
self-critical,
but yeah,
and
so interesting.
yeah,
Yes,
it is interesting. Yeah, it's because it's been, when people tell me their running goals in resolutions, for example, come often from like a place of self-hate and people wanting to change themselves. And like, if you want sustainable running, you don't want to run with a self-critic. You want to run with your best friend.
yes, that's exactly right. And I've really had the universe has offered me a lot of opportunities to practice this with injuries. And as I get older, like I get injured more often and I'm just a lot slower. And for a while, I just stopped running because it was so hard for me to recognize that. Now I'm like, oh my gosh, I am 50 years old and this is amazing. Yes, I'm slower than my 16-year-old, and that's totally fine. It's,
Yeah.
no,
It totally took me a while. I used to race marathons. I cannot run those same speeds. And I like just didn't sign up for races because I don't want to know the time,
right.
Oh,
Then you're
that's so fascinating.
blocking the joy. And to the point of the resolutions, I just did a podcast on this today about how it's the new year, but a new way to think about it. Instead of thinking like I need to be better, like here's the question for all of you viewers: what would be amazing? What do you want more of?
Mm,
Be delightful. What if that's how we thought about the new year or a new day or a new hour, whatever? You don't
yeah.
have to wait till the new year, but yeah.
Yes. And
Okay.
when you were talking about the people who are overwhelmed, I like coaching because it takes things away from people. When people come to me for coaching, I do coaching within my institution and they're wanting to improve themselves. My coaching's Martha Beck's coaching, and I did leadership coaching, which leadership coaching's meant like just your mind, but Martha Beck's, it's a lot of holistic.
Yeah.
And I go in there with, what can I take away from this person?
Yeah.
That's, whether it's thoughts that are getting in the way or they're just stretched way too thin. Because I think when it comes to physicians in their institutions and they talk about burnout and they're assigned to do something more to address the burnout. And I'm like, we can't be hypocrites, right? I'm going to help relieve you of something that's on your plate, and don't fill it back up, right? Allow that white space to be there.
Permission to do less. I mean, to me, that's just like another beautiful concept, like less is more, but we've been brainwashed as a society that more is more. And I think that that's ridiculous. Like, are you loving your life right now? Okay, then let's do something different. And I think you had a post recently where you said that you showed up or one of your fellow coaches showed up and said something like, what's what's crappy in your life right now or something like that. Like,
Oh, yes. So in
love
Martha
that because it's
Beck's,
like,
it's in
let's
Martha
focus.
Beck's book. So
Yeah.
what sucks? They
I
say,
love it that it normalizes, like, yeah, there are struggles, like, and even if
yeah,
it's not top of mind, because sometimes you're in a moment where like, oh, life is pretty decent, but it doesn't need to be so hard. That's what I always say. Like being a
yeah,
physician is tough, but it doesn't need to be so hard.
yes.
It doesn't need to be so hard. but we all need to do a collective chill the F out.
There's a book called Do Nothing by Celeste Headley that talks about why we all got into this concept of busyness. Like this is a status symbol. I notice it now.
Hate
Like
it.
after I read it, I was tuning in and people love to say they're so busy. But
I hate it.
now when people tell me, oh, you're so busy, it actually makes me withdraw and be like, oh, I got to chop some things off what I'm doing because I
Oh,
don't want to keep falling prey to that.
yeah, or sometimes I feel like my life is full. Like, yeah, with 4 kids and a business and like my own things, like life is full, but I choose what I want, right? Versus doing all of the things. Like, oh my gosh, I people don't need my permission, but sometimes I feel like they do because again, we have these societal pressures. Like I should be doing all the things, and like now I've got kids, and they should be doing all the things, and I should be volunteering at the school, and I should be doing volunteer work at the hospital, even though I already work there 80 hours a week. I'm like, oh my god, people, stop it! Like just
Mm, that resonates a lot with me. I work in academia and went to a burnout committee meeting and they were talking about email etiquette. And I said, we're losing physicians to suicide. There has to be something that addresses bigger problems here. Got into coaching at my institution, and that's been great. Person that was likely burnout was probably the one leading the burnout committee. And I just,
I was with my I started our burnout committee, ironically.
yeah, it's interesting, right? And so when it comes to academia, it's hard because I thought my whole life that's what I wanted to do. And just like people get disillusioned when it comes to medicine and what healthcare looks like, um, I'm currently at a state where I don't know what I'm doing in 2024, starting in the summer. And a lot of our, yeah, a lot of our academic,
Campus.
the thing is, so my current position's grant funded. So there's so much pressure on people who have soft funding to get a grant to fund your position. And if you don't get the grant, then you don't have a position.
Mm,
And I was like, oh my gosh, this is so stressful because the grants can take several months to get approved or not. So you can be sitting in limbo like I was in 2021. And I am, thinking about, sorry if anyone loves academia. I'm just thinking about we push to publish, but then how many people get the chance to read your publications because there's so many every day being published because everyone's forced to publish things. And so I love writing for Kevin MD because it's blog style, it's expressive, no one gives me the rules. It just
love it.
and So the thing I was tearing up about to the mentor that told me, I didn't know you cried, I thought you were numb, is because I'm like at this realization, like, first of all, I need a break. I have not taken a break. Besides the working for free for 5.5 months, like
Yeah,
when,
that doesn't sound like a break, girlfriend. That doesn't sound like a break.
no, the number one regret that I
You
have
need a break.
the number one regret that I have leaving oral surgery, was that it was like a day or two later, I started a different residency with no gap because we're afraid to sit still.
Because you're gonna like have to allow little discomfort, little restlessness, a little bit like I think I should be doing something. All the damn shoulds. Just watch them float by. Oh, there's another one, and there's another one. But you know what? You can practice, and just like you didn't become a physician overnight, right? Takes
Yeah.
practice to learn the things. It also takes practice to become a human being.
Yes. And not a human doing. I'm,
Yes,
I'm debating on taking a sabbatical for a year. Oh,
I think you should. Why
ah,
wouldn't you? It
ah,
sounds amazing and delightful.
yeah. So that's
Or to when
scary.
you're 90. I'm just gonna like ask you this right now. Like
Yeah.
when you're 90 years old looking back.
So it's interesting because with my eating disorder, I was told I wasn't going to make it. So my brain doesn't think very far ahead. And
Mm,
um it's an interesting place to be right now because I feel like it's easy for me to offer, you totally are worthy of a sabbatical, but
yeah.
because growing up the core wounds are lazy, selfish, it's like, how do we, I've just been surrounding myself with more and more people who have taken sabbaticals and like trying to just change the
And
narrative. And
what would you need? Sorry, not to get into like coaching stuff, but like what would you
yeah,
need to allow to like make it happen?
trusting myself because I'm coaching and I contracted out my coaching, and I'm like, I wouldn't just not work. I would just not be in a W-2 position.
Ah,
And that's scary to
but
me.
so even like to allow the scary, to allow the
Yeah.
feelings of, the old shame stories that come up and things like that. Again, you know this, but like, what if you could just self-compassion your way through that year?
Allow is my word for this year.
Interesting.
Isn't it interesting? Uh, and I had some time off for the holidays, and everyone's like, "You're glowing," and I was like, "Because I have time off." And I was
Wow, imagine
embracing
a
it.
year.
Yeah, and you're reading, I'm writing a book, and I'm like, no one wants to read this stuff. But I'm like, but what if
You're
they
writing a
do?
book?
Yeah, a memoir about, the 2014 to now, kind of losing yourself, almost dying from an eating disorder that people don't know anything about. Our medical system does not teach people the correct philosophies on what anorexia actually is. And so I'd like to help educate them, but in something that's interesting to read where it's applicable to people. So I have a title, it's more about meaning, like what happens when we are lacking meaning, and like the angst that we have as humans, and where our societal values are leading us astray from like genuine connections, things that actually matter. And they're pushing us to follow all these achievements that then just lead us further and further away from the fulfillment that we might actually be seeking.
Yes. Yes.
Um,
We've been led astray a little bit, but
yeah,
sometimes these big, I like you use the term like these catalytic things or catalysmic. Is that the word I'm supposed to use?
catalytic events. Yeah.
Yeah, like they happen and then it's like, okay, well now what?
Now
And
what?
that
Yeah.
thing is allowing. I think allowing is so freeing. And that's something that I only learned in the last few years because I used to fight, like I have to have it a certain way, otherwise
Yeah.
life's going to be out of control and chaotic. And in fact, that's absolutely not true when you can allow, oh, this is what is.
Mm-hmm. Oh
And I think
yeah.
it's so much it's so much lighter because it's heavy when you're trying to resist all the things. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
again, I know you know this, but for the
Yeah.
listeners, like actually it's like a big leap of faith, but it's just like when you are floating in the ocean and can just let yourself kind of go and
Yeah.
float and move, that's allowing.
It
And
reminds me of Loving What Is by
yes,
Byron Katie. So Byron Katie, I was leaning into her work, and she actually has events that you can go to for like, you donate only and they're live.
wow, that would be incredible.
I went, it's like on Zoom.
Did
Yeah,
you
I went
did
to one.
okay.
It was powerful, but she played this song by Alexi Murdoch. I don't know if that's really his name, but I can't stop playing it. It's something beautiful or something like that. I don't know exactly what it's called. It's got just this spiritual type of a beginning to it. And I find that a lot of what we're lacking in our human lives, there's the quote, like, we're not humans living a spiritual existence, we're not human beings living a spiritual existence, we're spiritual beings living a human existence, or something of that nature. I'm
I
like,
love that.
no matter what people believe, it's like there's this core desire that I think people are always seeking something, and it can show up in many different ways. And oftentimes it can show up like as addiction or chasing money or just chasing something. And we're not chasing the thing that's actually what our void is trying to seek.
Yes, I agree. Yes, and I love, yeah, I think we've talked about the spiritual stuff before. Like it's fascinating. I mean, that can be a whole nother talk, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm always curious what people's spiritual beliefs are, coming from a place of curiosity and exploration.
Yeah. My spirituality has grown tremendously in losing my sister, in
Mm.
fact. Um, and I've found ways to connect with her spirit, right? I mean, I've always believed that we have a spirit that is freed from our body. That's just been my belief all my life, but it's just become more apparent. And yeah, no, it's really, and I heard that terminology a couple years ago about being spiritual beings having a human existence. I'm like, oh, that totally makes sense. And it
Yes.
just And then it's sort of like, maybe we could be a little less serious and just have a little more
Have
fun
more
and like
fun. I've been
enjoy.
adding some more
And
fun.
so when I
Yes,
talk about
totally.
like this is our one precious life, I mean, I don't know, maybe we do swing back around again. Maybe we get
Yeah.
several precious lives on Earth. But that's what I say. Not saying that that's the right way, but um, maybe we could be a little less serious, have a little more
Yeah.
fun, a little more joy.
Mm. The fun thing is interesting because, as you know, I was dancing on Instagram, but then when I'm like down, I like can't force myself to have fun. But then a lot of times play is the thing that's going to help prevent burnout or get you through it. And my mom is so fun. She's like ridiculously fun and goofy and just doesn't have any mental health issues. And she's just something, she doesn't have anxiety. She doesn't have depression. Like when I asked, and I used to like resent that because I couldn't feel that way, but my nickname growing up was Silly Jilly because I was very funny and then I got very serious. And
Ah, interesting.
I don't like that about myself, but I got serious
She's
because
in there. Silly
yeah,
Jilly's
it's
there.
it's
I've
silly.
seen, I've danced with you, girl. I know
Yeah,
Silly Jilly's
there's
there.
this picture. This is my ex-boyfriend passed away. Um, and that's us. That was Halloween, so I'm in my twist
Twister.
twister
Yeah.
outfit. He was really funny. But like you, I became more spiritual. I feel his presence. I asked to help him guide. I feel his comfort. When I met Reese, I'm like, this dog was delivered to me by Blake. I named his third, they share a middle name. I'm like, there's no harm in me believing that's true, and I feel it.
Right. I mean, yeah, that's exactly right.
And the question about self-love, this is what I was contemplating because oftentimes the women that I know, men probably do this too, but I haven't heard them speak it out loud as much. But self-criticism is so natural, right? Like we make ourselves small, we apologize a lot often. And I was like, why is our normal response to like hate ourselves and be humble? And why do we hate people that say, I love myself?
Because we've been socialized that
We've
way.
been socialized, right? So I find when I was observing, I loved my undergrad. It was a liberal arts school. There was a lot of philosophy and religion and spirituality, and like people were just free and it's down to earth. Like no one dressed up really. They were just free. And I was like into poetry, and it was a very expressive school. And I remember just being so attracted, like not even at a like a romantic level, but just in awe of the women that just carried themselves carefree and were just confident. And, they just were artsy and free and like expansive. And I was just so rigid and restricted and like in my mind already. And I'm like, at this point in my life, that's the vision I want for myself. So I'm going to do what it takes in order to allow myself to just be and to be free like we were at the beginning of this. Like, we're just going to let loose now because
I
we
love
overthink
it.
it.
And again, I think it becomes a ripple effect because people see that and that joy of you, that inner zest and zeal and joy that you have, it's infectious, right? It starts to spread, which I think is only just going to benefit all of us humans on earth when we realize like, oh, I want some of that. Oh, I can get some of that. I just need to like drop some crap. And I understand, like, of course, the ego or my socialization, whatever, is going to make me think I should do more. But what happens if I do a little less?
Yeah. Like, who cares?
Like the crack in the earth does not open. You don't fall in. That's what you think is going to happen. And lo and behold, it doesn't. I don't know. I just turned 50 and I just feel like I have this newfound, like, I'm going to do what I want. And again, I feel like the last 5 years have been that way. After Gretchen died, I feel like I've got no more F's to give to deal with like stupid crap anymore. I'm like, you know what? What's really important to me? The people that I love, my friends, my family, helping other women physicians who are struggling, like meeting amazing people like yourself, like all this other stuff to like, so people think that I'm like, whatever, I'm not playing that game because the game doesn't effing work, people. My
No.
sister played the game.
Yeah.
She won all the awards. Everyone thought she was amazing, and she was amazing. I mean, I'm just saying she was amazing, and I loved her. But I would have loved her if she just like stayed at home and like did nothing, right?
Yeah. Yes. Your vigor for life, your capacity to bring your energy to communities, it, as someone who lost a lot of meaning and vigor for life, I'm very grateful for it.
Yeah, well, I'm grateful that we connected. I believe that spirits do a little bit of work and bring people together who are
Yes.
supposed to. And I just really feel like Gretchen whispered in your ear or my ear or whatever. Somehow we connected, and I just feel grateful, and my heart is full every time I see your beautiful face.
Oh, well, thank you. And I think when people, when they're so bogged down at work, those connections are hard. They miss them,
Yeah.
right? We're too
Because
busy.
you're down, you're no, 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 typing on
Down.
your things. Look up and ask people, how are you? What was the most amazing thing? What was the most difficult thing? Also, like, love Brene Brown as well, right? You're so good, by the way. I just was gonna point out, like, your knowledge of all these things that you read and these musicians. I'm like, I've read a lot of books. I've half read a lot of books. I hardly remember who the authors are, blah, blah, blah. Not to denigrate myself, but like, it's just not my strong point to have the crispness. But Brene Brown, I do love. And I remember her name. And she talks about like leading with vulnerability. So when we offer up a little bit of something where we're struggling, it makes other people feel more comfortable. And I tell you what, I feel like at this point, I used to be the queen of overwhelm. Now I may be the queen of vulnerability, and just that, like, I share very openly. I'm having a hard time. I'm missing my sister. Oh my gosh, I burst into tears recently because, I mean, it happens not infrequently, but we went on a family vacation, which was amazing.
Mm.
And I missed my sister so much because she would have loved it. And we did family photos for the first time since she's died. And I thought that would be an amazing gift for my parents,
Mm.
to have all of us do another photo. And it was also like I booked it and then I burst into tears. I was devastated. But I talk about it. I guess what's the point of me telling the story is just because I
Yeah.
share this stuff to
Share
let
it
people
outward.
know, like, yes, you see these photos of us on vacation. We all look like we're having a delightful time. And indeed we were. My 79-year-old father was out there on the dance floor leading the way in the Macarena, right? Like, it was ridiculous and fun. And all of us still have the hole in our heart. And so I talk about that. So
Yeah,
I
you can
lead with
hold
vulnerability. That's
I
all.
I really love that too. And you can hold more than one emotion at once,
Yes.
right? It's
The
true.
paradox is like my
Yeah.
new favorite coaching tool. Both can be true. We have an amazing time and we always miss Gretchen. And life is amazing. Like, I love being a physician, and the nursing shortage sure does stink. Like, both can be true.
And when people are internalizers and they don't let their emotions out, that's when we see addiction. That's when we see eating disorders. That's when we see workaholism, because we keep it in and it
Yeah.
gets overwhelming and it starts to eat. Gabor Mate will say autoimmune diseases. He'll say, a whole bunch of things when we're not allowing ourselves to express emotions. For women, we've often been taught to internalize anger, to not feel or express anger. Men are taught only to express anger, and they internalize softer emotions,
Yes.
and express and crying and so I love the message you just shared, allowing yourself, especially going in a safe space where people are going to allow you to cry and not feel so uncomfortable they want you to stop. It's let it out.
Yes, I agree. Safe is important. And at this point, if it makes someone comfortable, if I'm crying, well, they can walk away, whatever, because it doesn't bother me anymore, right?
Yeah.
Of course, I like to make people feel comfortable, but I don't get to decide how they're going to feel. So that I'm just sort of like, this is who I am, take it or leave it. Like, for a lot of people, they're like, yeah, no, you're a little bit much. And other people are like, no, like, that resonates with me. And so
Yeah.
I've just come to realize, like, yeah, it's just healthier. This is a book that I remember the name of. I am reading The Gift by Edith Eger. She is
Oh,
a Auschwitz survivor, and she's talking about, she was a psychologist, and the last chapter that I just read was just about how you have to, like, express emotion, what you allow. How does she say it? Something about like allowed to heal, but that's not how she says it. It was something that rhymed. But like, when we suppress stuff, it does eat away at us and causes problems. So I'll just reiterate to you, yes, I agree. Many of us have been taught, either as children and or certainly in our profession, to like shut stuff down. But it's okay in a safe space to learn, how can I explore this a little bit, learn to allow a little bit more. Because then you're less afraid of anything. The worst thing that can happen is an emotion. And many of us try so hard to not feel embarrassed or not feel disappointed.
yeah.
And like, what if that was okay? That we could learn to have our own back with self-compassion and like, wow, I'm disappointed. Shoot, I put in for this grant and I didn't get it. That is so disappointing.
Yeah,
But
it is.
that was the worst of it, people.
Mm-hmm. And disappointing other people was something that really weighed heavily on my self-worth. But my boss told me, you're going to disappoint me. I'm going to disappoint you.
Yeah.
That's
And we
true.
don't get to decide if they're disappointed because
Okay.
your behavior could be paramount and it could be disappointing to someone, right? Like when you
Yeah.
are like a parent, right? Like it's just never good enough. Like there are colleagues or bosses that it might be that way. Anyway, other people, we don't get to decide, but it's
No.
tricky, right? Being a human is not easy. Thank goodness for you, Jillian, bringing help to the masses.
Well, I appreciate you. I know we've talked about some amazing things today. What are the takeaways that you want to share with the audience?
Number one, it's okay if you're on the struggle bus of life because it's a full bus. We're all on
Mhm.
the struggle bus of life as humans. Nothing's gone wrong. You're amazing and you don't need a resolution to be better, right? And goals are fun, but that's different, right?
Yeah.
Um, that would be my number one thing. And number two, we have to learn to take care of ourselves, particularly the women. Like, I mean, the men too, but like we women are such givers and doers for everybody else that we put ourselves last. And we are very self critical, as you mentioned. And we just need to learn to have a little dollop of self compassion.
Hmm.
Self love is amazing. But if you can't even imagine, like looking in the mirror saying, like, I like you, what if you could just treat yourself like you do a stranger on the street? Probably a step up from where many of us are. So I do believe it's self-love, self-compassion for the win. But it's baby steps. And like, of course you feel this way because we've been socialized. It's like you're not a default human. Your brain is not defunct because you're having all these self-critical thoughts. It's because it's the fishbowl that we're swimming in. That's my takeaway. Take care of you, people.
Yeah. And what you were saying earlier, that they can change their thoughts. And in order to do that, they should connect with you where?
Yes. Yes, come find me. Come check out my podcast. Remind yourself. It's wherever you listen to your podcasts. I have a website, mamadoclifecoach.com. Come check it out. It's going to be amazing. It's going to be a
Do
great
it.
year.
We're going to make sure to put those links in the description below. Thank you so much for being with
Thank
me.
you so much. And I can't wait to have you on my podcast again in 2024 because there are things that
Woo!
you mentioned that I'm just like, ooh, we need to have further conversations about. So
Yeah, we need to keep it
thank,
going. So we
thank you
will
for
send.
inviting me to be here. It's quite an honor.
Thank you. All
Thank you
right.
for
Till
being
next
amazing.
time. I'm sure you'll be on again. So until next time.